Okay, so get this. Today's deep dive. It's about this virus you've probably never even heard of. Chandipura virus.
Right.
And honestly, I was right there with you until I saw all these articles, these research papers he sent over.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, this Chandipura virus, it's like something straight out of a medical thriller.
Yeah, it really is. It's a fascinating case of how something can be under the radar for so long, and then all of a sudden, it's a serious health concern, especially in India.
Yeah, like it came out of nowhere.
Right.
So before we get into all the nitty-gritty details, let's rewind a little bit.
Okay.
Where did this mysterious virus even come from?
So the story starts way back in 1965 in a village in India, which is actually how the Chandipura virus, or CHPV, gets its name.
Okay, so named after the village where it was first discovered. But for decades, it was considered an orphan virus.
Right.
Like it was just, minding its own business, not really causing any harm.
Yeah, scientists had found it in sandflies, but hadn't really connected it to any major outbreaks. And then 2004, everything changed.
Oh, here we go.
A massive encephalitis outbreak hits Andhra Pradesh in India, and tragically, 183 people, mostly children, lost their lives.
That's heartbreaking.
Is
And so that's when the CHPV, it became the prime suspect.
exactly like solving a medical mystery.
Yeah.
Suddenly, this seemingly harmless virus is thrust into the spotlight, and it put health organizations around the world on high alert.
Yeah, you've got this seemingly harmless virus, and then all of a sudden, boom, major outbreak.
Right.
So what's the deal with this Chandipura virus? What makes it tick?
So CHPV is what's called an arbovirus, meaning it's transmitted through the bite of infected insects.
Okay.
And in this case, those pesky insects are sandflies.
Sandflies.
Yes, though mosquitoes can sometimes play a role.
Those tiny things that always seem to find their way into the smallest cracks.
Exactly.
I mean, no wonder children are particularly vulnerable.
Right.
I'm assuming more likely to be, bit while they're out playing and things like that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Sandflies, they thrive in areas with stagnant water, poor sanitation. They love to breed in those mud houses that are common in many parts of India,
Right.
making children living in those areas especially susceptible.
Okay, so a sandfly bites someone, they contract CHPV. What happens then? What are the symptoms we're talking about?
Well, that's where things get really concerning. It often starts like a really bad case of the flu,
Yeah.
High fever, headaches, sometimes vomiting.
Right.
But then, and this is particularly true for those young children, it progresses incredibly fast.
Okay.
We're talking convulsions, loss of consciousness, even coma and death.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes within just 48 hours of those first symptoms.
That's terrifying.
It is.
It almost sounds like, you could mistake it for just a really bad flu at first.
Exactly. Early detection is critical.
Wow.
And to make matters even more complex, there's still some debate in the scientific community about exactly how CHPV affects the brain.
Okay.
Some call it encephalitis, which is, inflammation of the brain. Others call it febrile encephalopathy, which means brain dysfunction due to the fever.
Right.
And then there's vasculitis-associated cerebral infarction,
Oh, here we go.
which basically means damage to the blood vessels in the brain.
Okay, so they know it attacks the brain, but they're still trying to figure out all the different mechanisms of how it actually does the damage.
Exactly. We know there's significant brain inflammation involved, and CHPV may also directly impact those blood vessels in the brain, which leads to those very serious neurological complications.
Which brings us to, I think, another crucial question.
Right.
If this virus progresses so quickly, how do doctors even diagnose it and then even more so treat it? What did you learn from the sources about that?
Well, unfortunately, there's no specific treatment for CHPV yet.
So there's no, antiviral, nothing?
No magic bullet yet.
Wow.
Diagnosing it requires specific tests like IgM ELISA or RT-PCR,
Right.
which can be a challenge to get quickly in those areas where the virus is most prevalent.
Especially if it progresses that fast.
Exactly.
So early detection is key. But even then, it's a matter of managing symptoms.
Sadly, yes, hospitalization is usually necessary to manage those severe symptoms, but it becomes a race against time. The sooner they can recognize it and start supportive care, the better the chances of survival.
So no cure, limited treatment options.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, with outbreaks like the one in 2004, what's the situation like now? Are we still seeing these outbreaks?
We are, unfortunately.
No.
CHPV is still causing outbreaks, and in fact, the largest one on record happened just this past July in Gujarat, India.
Oh, wow.
Another region where sandflies are common.
And this recent outbreak, how bad was it?
There were 38 confirmed deaths, but the actual number is suspected to be much higher.
Wow. And I know we talked about it earlier, but those sandflies in their breeding grounds,
Yes.
this outbreak, it followed a period of intense rain and flooding in India,
It did.
which, that's just creating ideal conditions for these things to multiply.
Exactly.
So are you suggesting that climate change and these extreme weather events could actually be contributing to the spread of this virus?
That's certainly a question that researchers are asking.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense. Climate change is causing these more extreme, unpredictable weather patterns.
Right.
And this could definitely lead to more outbreaks of CHPV and other diseases spread by insects.
Yeah,
It's a pretty unsettling thought.
it is. We need to talk more about the research being done on CHPV, what scientists are doing to combat this virus. But first, a quick break. We'll be right back. We're back, and I gotta say, learning about those outbreaks, it's pretty concerning stuff.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned there's a lot of research happening around CHTV, so people are on the case, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's some really interesting work being done. One group that caught my eye is led by this guy, Anirban Basu, at the National Brain Research Center in India.
Okay.
They're doing some really groundbreaking research, trying to understand exactly how CHPV affects the brain at the cellular level.
Okay, so now we're getting into the really complex stuff.
Yeah.
So what have they discovered?
Well, they've been focusing on something called microglial activation.
Microglial.
Yeah, so imagine the brain has its own immune system.
Okay.
Microglia are the first responders.
Okay.
So when they sense a threat, like a virus, they jump into action.
So they're like the brain's defense system. They're trying to
Right.
fight off this virus.
Exactly. But, and here's where things get interesting, Basu's team, they found that this microglial activation, while meant to be helpful, might actually be causing more harm than good.
Okay.
They call it the bystander effect.
The bystander
The
syndrome.
bystander effect, yeah.
What does that even mean in the brain?
So it means that in the process of trying to fight off the virus, these activated microglia, they release substances that can actually harm nearby healthy neurons.
Okay.
And neurons, those are those vital brain cells
Right.
that are responsible for communication in your brain. They're like the messengers.
Right.
And this bystander effect, it's disrupting those messages.
Wow, so it's like the brain's own defense system, while it's trying to fight off CHPV, is accidentally causing collateral damage.
Yeah.
Exactly. To prove this, they did these experiments using infected cell lines.
Okay.
And what they found was actually pretty alarming. These chemicals released by the microglia, they were actually killing off those nearby neurons, leading to even more damage.
So it's not just the virus itself, but also our body's response to it that contributes to how severe this disease can actually be.
You got it.
That's a game changer.
It is. It really is. And it really kind of begs the question, is the severity of CHPV solely due to the virus itself?
Right.
Or are these other factors, like our own immune response, playing a significant role?
Wow.
It's like the body's battling itself while it's also trying to fight the virus.
Right. And that makes the research that Basu and his team are doing even more important. Because what they're doing could have huge implications, not just for treating CHPV, but maybe for other neurological conditions as well.
You hit the nail on the head. If we can understand how to, regulate this microglial activation
Right.
to prevent that bystander effect, it could lead to entirely new treatment strategies
Wow.
for a whole range of brain-related illnesses.
That's incredible to think about. It's like this research is opening up a whole new avenue
It is.
for understanding and potentially treating brain disorders.
Exactly. And it also highlights how much we still don't know
Right.
about the brain and how it responds to these kinds of threats.
This is all so fascinating. It's like we're just scratching the surface of this virus and its impact on the brain.
Yeah, and it gets even more interesting. Because
Okay.
remember how we were discussing those different potential diagnoses for CHPV?
Yeah.
Well, some scientists think that there might be even more to the story than just encephalitis.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said it gets even more interesting.
Yeah.
What's the thinking about these other potential diagnoses for CHPV?
So remember how we were talking about how CHPV might be affecting those tiny blood vessels in the brain?
Yeah.
Some researchers are suggesting that this vascular aspect, this disruption of blood flow,
Right.
might be a much bigger factor than we initially realized.
So it might not be just about the inflammation from encephalitis, but also about damage to the blood vessels themselves.
Exactly. Think about it. If those blood vessels are compromised, it means that parts of the brain aren't getting the oxygen and nutrients that they need to function properly.
Right.
And that could explain that really rapid decline, those severe outcomes we see with CHPV.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like you're shutting off the lifeline to parts of the brain.
Exactly.
No wonder it's so devastating. So are they saying it's not encephalitis at all, or?
It's not that it's not encephalitis. It's more like there might be more than one mechanism at play here.
Okay.
It could be a combination of factors, the virus triggering encephalitis, which then leads to vascular damage.
Yeah.
Or maybe the virus directly attacks those blood vessels and that triggers the inflammation.
Wow.
It's a complex puzzle, and we're still missing some pieces.
A puzzle with incredibly high stakes? This all sounds like cutting-edge research, the kind that could rewrite what we know about CHPV and maybe even lead to new ways to treat it.
Absolutely, and it really underscores how important it is to support this kind of research. The more we understand about how this virus works, the better equipped we'll be to develop those effective treatments, and hopefully, one day, a vaccine.
Speaking of being equipped, this whole deep dive has been a crash course on a virus I knew nothing about. But what I really want to know is, what can people listening do with this information?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Knowledge is power.
Right.
And simply knowing that CHPV exists, that it can look like a common flu at first, and that it primarily affects children, that is crucial information, especially for people living in or traveling to regions where the virus is present.
So it's about being aware.
Yes.
And knowing the risks. And even though there's no specific treatment yet, early detection seems to be really vital.
Absolutely. If you live in an area where CHPV is a concern and you or your child develops a sudden high fever, severe headache, any of the symptoms that we talked about, don't wait. Seek medical attention immediately.
Right.
Early intervention can make a world of difference.
And what about those pesky sandflies? Any advice on avoiding those little biters?
You know, simple precautions go a long way.
Okay.
Keep living spaces clean, free of stagnant water. Use mosquito nets, especially at night.
Right here.
And wear long sleeves and pants when you're in areas where sandflies are common.
Okay.
Insect repellent is your friend.
All great tips, so much practical advice packed into one deep dive.
We covered a lot of ground, that's for sure. From a once obscure virus to a growing health concern, CHPV is a stark reminder of how interconnected things are.
Right.
Human health, the environment, scientific research.
Well said. And speaking of reminders, I think we'll leave our listeners with a final thought. If climate change is contributing to the spread of CHPV, as some experts believe,
Yeah.
what other health threats might be lurking on the horizon as our planet continues to warm? Something to ponder. Until next time on The Deep Dive, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay healthy.
Subscribe to my channel.